So, when we talk about the difference between the setting, the year it's set in, and when it may have been written, one of the things that you might notice is that the story is set in the context of a captivity. But if it was written later, which scholars think it was, the context that the writer was trying to address wasn't one of captivity, it was one of occupation. Here's why this becomes important. There are several books in the Bible that get categorized as, we call them, literature of the oppressed. And a lot of people, especially in a privileged culture, may not know that this category even exists. They may not know about this idea of literature of the oppressed. But once you learn about literature of the oppressed, one of the things you figure out is that if you have been dominated, taken over by a foreign military, and they take away your religion and your land and your name, right, and your traditions and your culture, you probably don't have the freedom of press that we enjoy and that First Amendment defense of free speech. When you are occupied by a foreign military power, you often can't say what you want to say in plain language. So you have to get creative. And one of the ways that you get creative is to tell stories about the past, but you tell them with a wink. There was this young man named Daniel, and he was taken to this far-off land a long time ago. And here's what happened. But at the end of the story, you sort of have to read in a wink. Because the subtext is, in the same way that Daniel resisted when he was carried away to a far-off land by an occupier into captivity, he is our model. He's the hero of our story. And you, young people, should exhibit that same kind of restraint and resistance in this current occupation. In the same way that Daniel, in his captivity, stood up for what he knew was right and didn't give up his conviction and didn't compromise his culture, wink, we should look up to Daniel and do the same kind of thing with our current situation. And there's the subtlety that comes with the literature of the oppressed. It often gets called apocalyptic literature because we in the 20th and 21st century didn't know what to do with it, and so we thought it might be about our future. And so the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel have often been projected into our 21st century future. And we spent a lot of time when the prophecies come trying to figure out, like, is the bear Russia and is the star of the east China, and where does India come in? And of course America is the city on the hill because we're the good guys, right? And God bless the USA. And right, that's how we have read this kind of literature, but we've read it through the lens of being the dominant culture. These passages in Scripture and some of Jesus' teachings read very different if you read them not from being high on the hog as the victor, but from the underside, the underbelly of the beast as the occupied. And so as we read this story, we have to hold these two things always together because they're going to be mutually informing. The story is set, let's say, 600 years before what we call the beginning of the Christian era, the Common Era, before Christ, however that gets dated. But it's in that gap that this literature of the oppressed starts to play a role. We can feel like this happened a long time ago and feel like it's really far away and alien. But it would be like if I told you a story about a young girl named Liberty who walked to Philadelphia in 1776, right? I'm leaving breadcrumbs, and you would just inherently, sort of second nature, you would know what kind of a story I was telling you. Okay, Liberty, got it. Philadelphia, got it. 1776, got it. And then you'd say, just out of curiosity, at any point in this story, does she find a big bell? Right? You would know because you have a framework for the road signs. You would know what country you're in. In the same way, the original audience that would have read Daniel would have known these little breadcrumbs that were being left and would probably know what to do with them. So I just want to ask the simple question. Whether you read the story in a straightforward way, 600 years before BC, let's say, in this Babylonian captivity, as these were real events that happened, okay? If that's how you read this, what would be the takeaway? I think it comes down to 4 things. Don't give in. Don't give up your culture. Don't compromise your conviction. And be faithful to your God. Those would be the takeaways that we're supposed to get out of Daniel 1. Well, that's really helpful because if you take that and move it forward 200 or 300 years and you read it as literature of the oppressed, the takeaways transfer perfectly. Don't give in to their ways. Don't give up your culture. Don't compromise your conviction. Be faithful to your God. So whether the bad guys have carried you away to a foreign land or they have conquered and dominated you on your land, the lessons are exactly the same. I find that really helpful way to read the lens through 2 slightly different tilts and to see as we compare these going forward that sometimes the difference is going to be pretty profound. Here, they happen to transfer perfectly. To say, and is there anything we're supposed to get out of this as modern readers? And I think there's going to be some conversations that come out of that. So as I close this time, I just want to say to you, both in its original setting, where the events take place, by its probable later writer for a different circumstance, and for you as a contemporary reader, I want you to hear what I think are the 4 encouragements out of Daniel 1 today. Don't give in. Don't give in to their ways. Don't give up your convictions and your culture. Don't compromise. Be faithful to your God and to what God has called us to do as a people, for God is faithful. Just because they're doing it doesn't mean we should do it. And just because they eat and drink like that doesn't mean we need to eat and drink like that. And just because they may do eye for eye and tooth for tooth, tit for tat, doesn't mean we need to lower ourselves to that standard. And just because we feel defeated, or conquered, or discouraged, or disoriented, don't give up. Stay true to your conviction, for God is faithful. If you believe you're right, conduct yourself rightly, and right will come to your defense. That's a pretty good word, right?